Hi everyone, I'm Victoria and welcome back. Today's video is a True Crime Friday video. Today we'll be doing the disappearance of the Sodder children. So, this one's actually kind of close to me and I've actually done research on this one. The reason why is because a lot of these, well, not all of them, but some of these true crime videos, or true crime stories, I have researched and done a research paper and stuff like that on them. So, and this just happens to be one of them. We'll be doing two more that I've done as well later on, but for now we're gonna get into the Sodder children, shall we? Okay.
Buzzfeed Unsolved, we cover the mysterious disappearance of the Sodder children.
Hi Ryan.
You look
Jane.
enthralled. You look really excited.
I can't wait.
So I've researched the Sodder children. I have not watched this video though. So
I think you're about to have your mind blown.
We'll see.
Okay, cool. Let's get into it.
The year was 1945, on
Yes.
the night before Christmas in Fayetteville, West Virginia.
hey guys, by the way, we're in the United States now. I told you we were gonna do it.
George and Jenny Sodder, along with 9 of their children, were
Why'd they use those pictures? I love it.
asleep when a fire started in the house at around 1 a.m. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children escaped: Sylvia, Marion, John, and George Jr. The children that remained in the house were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, and the 5 of them shared 2 bedrooms between them, both rooms upstairs. George broke back into the house to save the rest of the children, but the staircase was on fire. When he went outside to retrieve his ladder, it was missing from its normal spot, and both of his coal trucks, which he wanted to use to park outside and climb on top of, were strangely not starting.
Don't park your coal truck by a fire. That's better.
Fair. That is fair. Don't park your coal truck by a fire. I also want to say, yes, if my children were in a fire in my house, I would go after them. But in this case, it was kind of a dumb decision, even though he didn't make it due to no ladder and no coal trucks starting. So
Idea?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine there was coal in the truck at
Oh,
the time.
okay.
I'm sure it was emptied of coal.
Well, I don't know. It's a coal truck.
He
It
just
could
climbs
be.
on top of a pile of coal.
It's all just
I mean, if you're looking for a ladder, you're not gonna want to stand on top of an empty truck.
covered in flammable coal, jumping into a house. Bad idea.
Marion, one of the children who escaped the fire, ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department.
Good for
But the
her.
operator didn't respond, and when a different neighbor attempted to call, she also got no response from the operator. That same neighbor actually drove to town and found the fire chief, F.J. Morris, in person. But even though the fire department was only located 2.5 miles away from the home, the firefighters bizarrely didn't reach the Sodder house until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire began.
This is one of the things that pissed me off with this case. You were maybe at most 10 minutes away from this house, and it takes you 7 hours to get there. Now, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, okay? Let's say Marion walks over to the neighbor's house. They don't get an answer, which is strange, by the way. The next neighbor also calls. Again, strange that they didn't answer. But then those same people drive maybe 2.5 miles away to get a fire department. And they still, let's say this is within an hour, they still didn't show up for 6 more hours. What kind of fire department is this? Because obviously it wasn't a good one if it took them 7 hours to even come close to coming to a fire. Like, the fire has already started. And you take 7 hours to get there.
And by the time they arrived, the house was literally ash.
Time to
I wonder
reeval
why it took 7 hours to get there.
your staff there.
Thank you. Time to reevaluate, because obviously something's wrong.
You really see where your tax money's going there.
That's not like, oh boy, we really dropped the ball on that one. That's like firefighters from Florida could have driven up there in time.
In their defense,
Exactly.
it was Christmas Eve.
Just because it's Christmas Eve does not, absolutely does not mean that a fire department has to take 7 hours to get to a fire. Just because it's Christmas Eve. Even on Christmas Eve, fire departments still are supposed to go to a fire.
Oh, it's fine if people die
So
on
like
Christmas
they
Eve.
tried calling. I'm not saying I'm
fine
condoning
if
them
people
for
die
being
on
7
Christmas
hours
Eve.
late to a fire that was 2.5 miles away.
It's just not not great.
In fact, I'm pretty sure I could run that in probably about an hour at least.
I could spit
Exactly.
the fire out
I
in
could
that
probably
time.
chug a
I
beer
could
and
just
run
spit
I
on the
could
fire.
spit the
Just-
fire out.
Authorities scavenged the ashes of the fire
Really?
looking for the remains of the 5 missing Sodder children, but nothing was found, and they were presumed dead due to the fire. The fire chief, F.J. Morris,
The problem is, you could not presume them to be dead. At this point, you should be saying they're missing. If they didn't find any evidence in the rubble or anything like that, for one, bones do not disintegrate like that. They do not burn at this. The fire, I'm pretty sure, was not hot enough to burn bone. So, even if, let's say hypothetically, the bone did burn, you'd still find bone fragments, which they did not find. So, there's no way to say they were killed in this fire. They were missing at most.
suggested that the fire may have been so hot that it completely cremated the children's
No.
bodies, including their bones.
No.
While that theory sounds reasonable, it is not entirely accurate.
Thank
because
you.
when flesh is burned away, bones are still typically left behind, likely in fragmented form. Additionally,
you.
there was no smell of burning flesh reported during or after the fire.
Even more of a reason. These people are dumb. Ryan and Shane, so far, they seem pretty accurate on their details. This case and the other 2 cases that I'm going to talk about later are the cases that piss me off. And the reason why is because police, fire, whatever, law enforcement in general, whatever, took the worst precautions necessary. And if you're gonna do a job, do it right. And this is not what happened in any of these cases that I'm gonna talk about, including this one.
The cause of the fire was deemed to be bad wiring in the house. And in the week after, the Fayetteville coroner's office issued death certificates for the 5 Sodder children. The basement of the house still remained, and George would later use a bulldozer to cover it up with 5 feet of dirt to create a memorial to his children. Soon after the fire, George and Jenny began to suspect their children were not dead, but instead
Really? The no evidence told you nothing?
kidnapped, believing the fire was
wonder-
deliberately set as a diversion and not the
Probably.
result of faulty wiring. In fact, George had actually had the wiring in his house checked earlier that fall by the power company, which had deemed the wiring in safe working order.
Who said the wiring was faulty?
Somebody in the coroner's office. You'll see why they may have done this later. But
okay.
anyways,
But before we dig into the theory that the children were kidnapped, let's discuss George's personal history to provide some context.
Ooh.
George Sodder had immigrated from Italy, and Fayetteville, where the Sodders lived, had a small but engaged Italian immigrant community, a community that George was very vocal in, especially about his disdain for Mussolini, sparking a
Oof. This was a time when this was not a good idea. Ooh.
Few heated debates in the community. George also reportedly never revealed why he left Italy, leading some to speculate that he may have been involved in some shady business in Italy.
Possibly.
Many believe that either of these reasons may have led to the kidnapping of George's children. Let's examine some curious occurrences that support a possible kidnapping. In the fall,
Before we continue, I'm gonna go ahead and say, based off of my research and just knowing about this case in general, these kids were definitely kidnapped. Like, there's no way. Whether they were murdered later or not, that has yet to be determined based off of me. But they definitely were kidnapped. There's no reason to suspect they died in that fire or anything.
just before the house fire, a life insurance salesman came to the house, and when he saw that his sale wasn't going to be successful, he became infuriated, yelling at George, quote, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini."
This is a life insurance salesman, by the way. I get it. At this time in, history, it wasn't a good idea to say anything bad or dirty about Mussolini, especially around the Italian population, just because of, stuff going on in the world. There's certain times when, in history and even in present day, where you shouldn't say your political views, because your life and the people around you could be in danger. So it's more of a safety thing. You want to make sure you and your family and everyone around you is safe. And this was a bad idea to go out and talk bad about someone.
End quote.
Right, I think we've solved it. All right, well, it's been fun.
He was the life insurance salesman, was the first suspect, but hopefully they'll tell you why.
See you later. I will set this house on fire, and your children are going to die. Huh, who could it be?
Yes.
Who could have done this?
Seems a little on the nose for me.
He
Yeah,
just
really,
listed
like-
every single aspect of the case in nice, easy, laid out fashion.
House on fire. Kids are going to go up and yeah.
It was like the third act of a student film when they had to wrap everything up in exposition and dialogue.
Yeah. And this, oh shit, it's due tomorrow.
In the days leading up to
Fair.
the fire, two of the surviving Sodder sons witnessed a man watching the younger Sodder children come home from school on Highway 21. Another suspicious occurrence happened that night. On the night of the fire at around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang, and Jenny got out of bed to answer. This would result in an important observation. Jenny noticed the lights were still on downstairs. As she started to fall back asleep, she heard a loud bang on the roof, followed by the sound of something rolling. And an hour later, she woke to the smell of smoke entering her room downstairs. The detail that is interesting is the fact that the lights were still on. If the fire had been caused by faulty wiring, as had been suggested, then that meant there wouldn't have been power to the house.
He is extremely correct here. If the lights were on, why would there be faulty wiring? Just saying. Also, the life insurance salesman, by the way, that was not the guy following them around. I don't know if they're gonna say he is, but he wasn't. It was actually someone else that hopefully they'll get into.
Meaning that the lights shouldn't have been working. But Jenny
Fair.
saw that they were on about an hour before the smoke. And later, the Sodders would claim that they saw the lights on while the fire was occurring as well. Additionally, a witness to the fire claimed that they saw a man removing a block and tackle typically used for removing engines from cars, perhaps explaining why both of George's trucks weren't working that night.
Did they,
Also, I don't think a life insurance salesman was such a mastermind to do this,
as
by
their
the way.
post-mortem, did they look in the cars to see if there were engines in them? No.
No, I mean, I don't think he removed the engines completely because it's not like he could like waddle away with really heavy engines. I think maybe he just
That
tampered
depends
with,
on
you know,
who
just
he
pull
is.
a couple wires here and there.
Okay.
This is all a possibility.
It sure is.
I'm just presenting the case here. All right?
After the fire, when the family visited the memorial
That is a creepy picture of a baby.
George had set up, Sylvia found a hard rubber object in the yard, an object that Jenny believed may have caused the loud bang that woke her that night. But even more interesting was the fact that after further inspection from George, he believed the object was a napalm pineapple bomb, similar to those used in the war at the time.
I mean, it sounds like someone's.
This has something to do with who I think actually did it later. But, yes.
Set the house on fire.
Yeah, it clearly does. I think we have enough here to
Yeah,
say.
Yeah.
someone
probably
definitely
set the house
set
on fire.
the
Probably was a
house
false
on
alarm.
fire.
With all these strange occurrences and not
Why
believing
so
that the
conservative?
fire could have burned her children's bones to ash, Jenny began to experiment by burning different types of animal bones.
I appreciate that she was so interested in finding the truth that she found, whether she found him or killed the animal bones and started doing tests herself.
All
I
of which
appreciate
left
it.
remains.
Exactly.
She spoke to a crematorium employee who told her that in cremation, bones were left behind even after bodies burned at 2,000 degrees
Yes.
Fahrenheit for 2 hours.
Yes.
And the Sodder home only burned for about 45 minutes.
Again, going over what I said at the beginning, they would have found bones. If they were in that fire, there would have been bones. Bones do not burn that easily.
Also noteworthy is the fact that remains of household appliances
That's why we have anthropologists.
were found in the rubble, meaning not everything was ash.
Exactly.
So clearly, there should have been bones left.
Should have been bones.
There have
Yes.
also been reported sightings of the children. One occurred that night while the fire was still burning. A woman claimed to see the children in a car that drove by while the fire was still raging. 50 miles west of Fayetteville, a woman who operated a tourist stop told police that she saw the children the morning after the fire. Quote, "I served them breakfast. There was a car with Florida license plates at the tourist court too." End quote.
Nice of her.
Yeah. At all.
Yeah, I mean,
Giving them breakfast.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of
she's
people
just-
wouldn't do that.
Nice to have breakfast.
Okay, well, I agree. Breakfast is nice. I enjoy bacon.
Agree to agree.
What are we doing here?
At a hotel in nearby Charleston, a woman reported seeing 4 of the 5 children about a week after the fire. Here's her statement to the police. Quote, "The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I do not remember the exact date. I tried to talk to the children
I don't know if you guys can see where I believe this is going, but this has something to do with
in a
it.
friendly manner, but the man appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. I sensed that I was being frozen out, and so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning." A few years later, George saw a photo of New York City school children in a newspaper, and one of the kids looked like his missing daughter, Betty. George drove all the way to New York to investigate, but once he tracked down the child's parents, they declined to speak with him. In 1947, 2 years after the fire, George and Jenny attempted to involve the FBI, who offered to help,
Fair.
but in a curious turn of events, the Fayetteville Police and Fire Department
I think I know what they're about to say. So the FBI cannot, not even the SBI can investigate without police allowance or the fire department allowance. They usually have to be invited to go there, And if local law enforcement says no, they cannot. So,
both denied their offer.
yeah.
What do you gain in denying to help the FBI? All you have to do is give a couple interviews, maybe. Like what?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
paperwork.
but if they were hiding
How
something.
busy is this fire department?
They're
Apparently not.
probably not that busy, but that's probably how they like it.
I think there's some shady
Fair.
shit going on there, but that's just my opinion.
George and Jenny turned to a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley.
Yeah. CC Tinsley's here.
That does
What'd
sound.
you
Love
say?
this guy, by the way.
No bones,
Love
huh?
CC Tinsley.
Sounds like a case for
So they-
CC Tinsley.
Apparently, they got an investigator from a time machine. They dropped him back in a time machine. went back to the
1940.
CC Tinsley, by the way, seems to be the only reasonable, other than the FBI, seem to be the most reasonable at finding things. But it takes a turn for the worse,
Five, of
That's
course
not
he
how
said.
they did not
Oh,
speak
yeah.
like that. That's not how they spoke. in
Yes, that's how they spoke.
unfortunately.
One suspicious revelation occurred when Tinsley discovered that a member of the coroner's jury who decided the Sodder house fire was an accident was the same life insurance salesman who had threatened George earlier in the fall.
Who put together this jury? The coroner? We're putting together a jury to investigate this crime. Can you wrangle up all the maybe some lunatic salesmen?
By the way, is there no police officer that knows how crime works? Like, how did they not interview?
That was my question. There's like this entire from the fire department at Fayetteville, West Virginia, and the police officers that decided not to involve the FBI and decided that it would be the worst idea to continue on an investigation when there's obvious evidence that they weren't burned in the fire. Just, they needed better Crime Stoppers, basically.
Dude, this life salesman, man, like,
I don't know. Look, I'm telling
Exactly.
you, nobody knows how to do their job in this town.
it's unbelievable. Like, so you're telling me he screamed in your face that he's gonna murder your family?
Interesting.
Sounds like a good dude to me. I don't
Yeah.
know what you're talking
Let's
about.
put him on that
Jesus.
jury.
Another interesting find occurred when Tinsley interviewed townspeople about the fire. Tinsley heard a rumor from the town minister that the fire chief had been telling people that he'd actually found a heart in the ashes of the Sodder home, and that he'd hidden it in a dynamite box and buried it where the home once stood.
Why does
Lies.
the minister tell rumors?
Tinsley persuaded the fire chief to show him where it was buried, but once dug up, the heart was actually beef liver and had never been in a fire.
Oh, darn it. I accidentally... That's my darn sandwich. No wonder that sandwich tasted so bad the other day. I mixed them up.
Why the hell the chief did this was apparently to provide some closure to the Sodder family.
I guess you could.
I can see that. I can see the closure. But the problem is, you gotta have more evidence than that. Because, I mean, you had a private investigator come to you, and you know that there is no heart. Why don't you just be truthful? Seriously.
Say it's a heartfelt gesture.
Ryan?
Oh
No.
shit!
No,
Oh man. See you guys later.
Nope, sit down.
Jesus.
In August 1949, the Sodders hired a pathologist named Oscar B. Hunter, who excavated the dirt that covered the Sodder basement and the remains of the house. He found 4 shards of human vertebrae and sent this to the Smithsonian for analysis. They hypothesized that the bones were from a 16 to 17-year-old person. However, the oldest missing Sodder child was a 14-year-old boy, making it improbable that the bones belonged to him. They also stated that there was no evidence that the bones had been exposed to fire, and that the bones likely originated from the dirt George Sodder used to fill the basement, rather than the remains of the house.
Which means, wherever the dirt was originally, probably had someone there.
This was before DNA investigation had come into play, and according to the Smithsonian, the bones were given back to George Sodder, but their current whereabouts remains a mystery.
Which means if we ever find these bones, whether it's with any of the Sodder children or anything like that, or just randomly given to someone, we can do DNA evidence, I think. now, or at least find some more evidence about what happened to these bones.
What did he do with them? Just
Exactly. No one knows. Huge tragedy that we can't DNA analyze those bones to see if they belong to the Sodder children.
Yeah.
After the Smithsonian revealed their findings, West Virginia Governor Oki L. Patterson called a hearing in the state capitol building in Charleston, West Virginia, where he officially declared the Sodder case to be closed.
That was stupid. That was probably the stupidest thing he could have done. Obviously, the case should be ongoing. Because when a case is closed, in order to reopen it, there has to be a whole bunch of different things. So, let's say they find the children. They have to somehow prove that that is the child.
Telling George and Jenny that their search was, quote, hopeless, end quote.
I don't think
This
it was
led to George and
hopeless.
Jenny setting up a billboard on Route 16, advertising their missing children, where it remained for nearly 40 years.
40 years. They're
Yep.
tenacious.
I mean, to be fair, if it was my kids, I wouldn't stop. And I
Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
if 5 of
I
your
mean-
kids.
You're missing 5 out of, 9 kids? Yeah. I would be worried too. I'd be looking for them everywhere.
Are
so.
have vanished.
Oh, and also a salesman screamed in my face, "I'm gonna burn your house down and
Yeah.
murder your family."
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I would probably keep searching.
The billboard kept the story alive and mentioned details such as the children being kidnapped, the fact that the faulty wiring did not cause the fire, the fact that there was no bones or residue found, and lastly, accused the law officers involved of a cover-up. Quote, what was the motive of the law officers?
I love their parents. They knew something was wrong, and they knew law enforcement officers weren't doing a good job at it.
Involved. What did they have to gain by making us suffer all these years of injustice? Why did they lie and force us to accept those lies? End quote. People around town had various theories. Some believed the mafia had been involved. Others believed the children were now in Italy or that they had been sold to an orphanage. The family received a letter from a woman in St. Louis saying that the oldest missing daughter, Martha, was in a convent there in St. Louis. Someone in Florida also said the missing children were living with Jenny's distant relative. And the ever-diligent George Sodder investigated all these tips, but each came up empty. Another hopeful tip came in 1968, 23 years after the fire, in the form of a photograph sent to Jenny specifically addressed to her, not the family. There was no return address on the letter, but it was postmarked in Kentucky. The photo was a man in his mid-20s. George and Jenny believed this could be their son Louis, who was 9 at the time of the fire. The man in the picture had the same dark brown eyes, dark curly hair, strong straight nose, and upwardly tilting left eyebrow. On the back, it had a handwritten note. Quote, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Lil Boys, A90132 or 35, end quote. They hired a private detective to go to Kentucky and find him, but strangely, the detective was never heard from again.
I think that's the first.
They hire a private detective and he goes missing. Do you see where I'm going
Time
with
I've ever
this?
heard of a detective going missing. That's like a fish drowning.
And you know what's strange
There's a
about
lot of
this?
those, by
On
the
the
way.
internet, nobody seems to really care about this point.
When a detective goes missing,
Yeah. For some reason, you have 5 missing children and nobody cares.
you've got some pretty powerful adversaries. I'd say it's time to quit the game.
Some on the internet have theorized the detective took the money and ran,
Probably.
but nobody knows what happened to him for sure.
I don't think the detective would have taken the money and run though, because if you're a private eye, unless it was a shit, like if it was enough to survive for the rest of his life,
Oh, that's true. Yeah, why would he? Yeah, that's. I mean, I
probably
can't
built
imagine-
up a nice client base. He's got to throw his Rolodex.
It's not like that. Like they gave him $1 million. It was
it's
probably like
yeah.
5,000. That's
Yeah,
what the
enough for a
poster
few
said.
sandwiches.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, those are some big sandwiches.
Yeah,
But
they
yeah,
big.
point taken.
George Sodder passed away shortly after in 1969 at the age of 74, and Jenny Sodder passed away in 1989 at the age of 85. Sylvia, who was 2 at the time, is the last remaining Sodder child alive. She maintains that her siblings did not die in the fire that night. Jenny
I don't blame her.
Henthorne, Sylvia's daughter, told the Times West Virginian to post any information on websleuths.com. Quote,
I love
"My
it.
mom promised my grandmother that she would never let the story die. That's what my brother and I are doing now." End quote. After all these years, the question still remains. What really happened to the Sodder children that one fateful night? Was this truly the result of a tragic house fire? Or were the children actually kidnapped? Hopefully, for the sake of the remaining family, all of these questions will be answered. But for now, the case remains unsolved.
Okay, so they didn't say my theory. I actually think it might have been the Italian mafia. I know that's a bad thing to say, but I do. So, he never explained why he left Italy. Some people thought it was for shady stuff. Well, maybe it was. Maybe that life insurance salesman was connected to him somehow and started making up a plan with the mafia. And then all of a sudden their house goes up in flames after he's saying all this stuff about Mussolini. So all this other stuff afterwards, all the suspicious stuff, the kids never being found, stuff like that, tells me that it could be that. And if that's the case, then we'll never, ever, ever find out. Because what's the one thing the mafia is good at? Hiding things. So, yeah, you're never gonna find the kids if that's it. So, the life insurance salesman could have been a part of it, but I doubt it. I think at most he probably was relaying information and that was it. Anyway, I hope you guys liked knowing a little bit about the Sodder children, or a little bit more about the Sodder children. Please leave a comment down below on any suggestions or anything you want to see come up. Have a great and wonderful day. Bye!